Why don't we take a moment to just set a positive motivation for our time today? And we can just think about what it is that brings us together today, what it is that we want to gain from this. And we can try to broaden that aspiration and think beyond just the couple of hours we'll be together, beyond just the week ahead, beyond just the coming months. I think that what we really want is we want to find tools to help us analyze things, investigate things, understand things, clarify things, so that we can figure out the best possible methods to help ourselves and to help all those who are suffering, and to bring all of us to happiness. Okay, and so with that intention, we can settle in and we can talk. Before we start, I just wanted to start by saying, after our session last week, I got so many emails. I loved it. And I tried my best to reply to some folks, and I know I didn't get to everybody. And I have more to say, but there's a reason that I haven't had it, that I ended up not replying to a couple of folks yet, and I'll get to that and I'll tell you. But before we do, I just wanted to know, like, where do things sit right now? Like, as I come in, I heard that maybe there were things that weren't completely clear in this chapter already. So any like big obstacles, like what would you guys say are the main obstacles in terms of understanding the material right now? In terms of the content, I mean.
The second half of the chapter. I'm sort of being flipped, but the part that with all the tables and the two tables, the one table, and really understanding what it's communicating.
I'm just trying to kind of scroll through. Oh, like where it says the first phenomenon affirmative, the second phenomenon affirmative, that got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Thanks.
Of course.
One thing that I was thinking about is the vocabulary. To know what vocabulary is important. Some of it is easy to understand. Others are new, and maybe even the way it's applied is new to us. So I feel like maybe it would be helpful, for me at least, I don't know if everyone else is feeling this way, that we maybe go over the vocabulary. And you've been doing that, but I don't know how, I don't know, I just feel like maybe we need to emphasize that a little bit more and understand the definition and the application. And in most cases that's clear, but there are some few areas that have been really unclear that I've missed.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other things jump out to folks?
I have a question that is regarding practicing the debate. Even though whatever we learn, until we practice, it will be very helpful. So I'm wondering, like, is there any practice group, or are we planning to start one, or how is it working?
Yes. I think you weren't here in the first couple of times.
No.
Yeah, we have an email list. So
is it?
Yeah, Sheila, what would be the easiest way for somebody to join the email list? But you're muted, Sheila. You're muted, Sheila.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I could either send everybody's email again, or we could all put our emails in the chat, and then everybody would just have it now.
Okay.
If anyone prefers. Should we do that?
Okay, thank you.
Another question would be whether related to that, whether there are exercises in the other chapters, because that was really helpful the first couple of weeks to step through it in our meeting.
Yeah. Okay. So let me take all of that and let me try to address it all at once. Because I had a thought this week, and I think what you guys are raising just kind of makes it even stronger. And it's this, the types of questions that are coming up, and especially the fact that multiple folks independently seem to have gone out and found other resources as well that they're kind of bringing into it, and they're kind of thinking already about these debates about is milk water and all of that stuff. It made me think that it might be helpful for us to change the course that I had planned. You know, my plan was to follow along with Daniel Perdue's course, because Daniel Perdue is like, you know, wasn't a master and expert in teaching this to Westerners. And so I thought, let's take it one chapter at a time, just like you suggest, and let's do that. And I feel like there are questions that don't get addressed until much later in the course that seem to be sticking points for us right now, you know, which I can understand and I can appreciate, right? And so what it occurred to me that maybe we should do is maybe we should go a little bit out of order, and maybe we should get into debate itself, right? Maybe we should get into the mechanics of debate itself, because a lot of the questions that you guys are asking right now, not only do they get addressed through debate, but the questions about, like, for example, the vocabulary and what is relevant and what isn't relevant, and how do those tables in the second half of the chapter fit in with everything like that. A lot of that, sorry, I'm not being very eloquent. Let me take a step back. Let me say this. I love Daniel Perdue so much. Why did Daniel Perdue include that table in this chapter before he taught us anything about debate? I do not know. I just genuinely don't know, right? Like, that table is a lot more theoretical. It's a lot more for like scholars of logic, you know, like the different modes of syllogism, like Barbara and Celerant and all of that you used to have in the West, or which you don't really need to know to be able to start debating, you know? So my thought right now, I wanted to know what you guys think, would be let's see what happens if we get into how to debate and to start debating a little bit. And then as we go, we can come back through these chapters and look at these like deeper aspects of it, and like a deeper understanding of the underlying, you know, variations of the modes of logic and things like that, and so forth and so on. But I wanted to hear you guys' thoughts on that.
I think, can I?
Mhm.
Yeah. I think that would be great, because I'm getting lost in what the big picture is. I don't, that was what I was going to say before. I can't see where this fits in, so it's a bit difficult. So yeah, I think that sounds like a really good idea. And also just make one comment about the emails. Is it perhaps easier if one person coordinates? Because chucking everybody's email in the chat is great, but like, how do you know if you're missing out on an email if there's a group that are taught? Like, it's maybe better if it's a little bit more coordinated, in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah, I suppose so. If anybody would like to volunteer, unfortunately, I know myself well enough to say I am not the person to do that.
Andrew, are you saying the informal nature of the of sending an email, for which we could probably create like a Google group or something? Or are you saying?
Exactly. I mean, so for example, I know that a couple of us were talking by email the week before last and last week, but now Dinesh, I mean, obviously Dinesh, you've just joined and you weren't in that email group. So now, do we piggyback on the emails that are all being sent, or do we start a new email trail?
I can do that. Yeah. As far as creating a group and trying to send it to everyone that needs to, or include everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That would
Yeah.
be nice. And I agree about understanding the objective. I think where I'm having difficulty now that some voices have been heard is that I don't understand the objective. I understand learning the logic, but where I was getting stuck was not being able to apply it to the goal.
Yes.
So I think if we go to the goal and play with that a little bit, then we'll understand why, why the logic is going to be important, and
Yes.
understanding that.
I think you summed it up very nicely, actually. I think you just put into words what my instinct, I guess, was, but I hadn't put my finger in it as well as you did. Thank you for that. Don't be shy. Does anybody feel differently? Does anybody feel that, like, would anybody be disappointed if we went a little bit out of order?
Are you thinking we would sort of blend the text and some practice of it, and we'd go out of order?
Yeah, basically, like, we can jump, like, I mean, it just so happens that the next step would be the next chapter in the text anyway. But after, instead of keeping going like that, like chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, I think we could move on to the practical debate chapters, and then we can circle back on this more kind of introductory theoretical material. Okay. Well, let's see how it goes. Maybe we'll find out why Daniel Perdue did it this way all along. But for what it's worth, I think it seems to me that his approach was to kind of get all of the theory in there and say, okay, now that we understand perfectly everything that's going on, here's how we apply it. But I think let's try it the other way and let's see how it goes. Yes.
Can I ask just one broader question, which is, I think the structure of this club has changed, and maybe it's longer. It's the 8 weeks now, but then I haven't been through another iteration. So I'm wondering, is there a way to continue it, or does it start over anyway?
Thank you for asking that. Yes. So a couple of things on that front too. So all of this is evolving very rapidly. And part of that is, frankly, how awesome you guys are. I have to just really frankly say that, like, there's so much passion, there's so much understanding, there's such probing questions. So that's kind of also been changing my thinking about it. So 2 things. One is, the thought had just occurred to me, but I haven't discussed it with the powers that be yet, whether we might extend this beyond 8 weeks if there's interest for that. That's one thing. And the other thing is that I was approached by a monk from Sarah J. We were approached by a monk from Sarah J. Venerable Losang Donyo, who is very interested in helping Tibetan debate spread in the West. And he's started like a practice group through Sarah J virtually, and we're talking about how we might combine forces and how we might have like an ongoing form of practice. And in fact, I have a meeting with him today, right after this, to talk about that too. So if anybody has any thoughts too, please feel free to send them to me, to email me. And that brings me to the other thing that I wanted to say, which is more than one person emailed me about the question of, is milk water? And they sent me a link to a text that says that while it is true that milk is wet and it is true that milk is moist, it is not true that milk is wet and moist. And they asked me, what does this mean, right? And I have no freaking clue. That makes no sense to me. Many years ago, I had seen something similar in a text one time. And after thinking about it a lot, I thought, oh, I think this was just a mistake. But here it is again, it wasn't about milk last time. So I also asked Venerable Donyo, and he's going to explain it to me today. So you have to come back next time for that one. I just wanted to acknowledge that too. Okay. So So with your indulgence, then I won't take the time to explain the tables in this chapter right now. I think we can come back to that later. I'm glad I see celebration. Okay, because I think we could spend a lot of weeks on that and then never get around to debating. So let's talk about how debate actually works. First of all, then, let me just take one step back and say, given what folks are saying about like how does this relate to the larger goal, we can ask, how does debate itself, how does that relate to the larger goal? What's the point of this, right? And there's a few things. One thing is let me state something from a Buddhist point. So from a Buddhist point of view, well, certainly from a Gelug point of view, right? To become enlightened or even to become liberated, we need to have realizations on the path. And to do that from a Gelug point of view, we need to first have a clear understanding of something, a single pointed understanding that is free from doubt or wavering or, and then we can meditate on that. And through that and some other things, we'll have a realization, right? So again, the bottom line with that is that we need to have a very clear understanding of something if we want to become liberated or enlightened. Now, forget the Buddhist path. I mean, set aside the question of the Buddhist path for a second. If we want to have a clear understanding of something, right? It doesn't matter what or why. Like, if we're investigating science, if we're investigating political positions, if we're whatever it is that we might want to understand, that's kind of where it dovetails, right? So Buddhism says we need to understand, but that's not just because Buddhism says it. Like in our lives, we might also want to understand. So one way or the other, understanding, right? Clear understanding. That's what the point of debate ultimately is going to be. It's to help us have I keep using the same words again and again and again. Let me see. Is to help us identify what mistakes we're making, what we're not seeing about the stance that we're taking, what are other implications about what we're saying. It's to really master the idea, right? Janet?
Yeah, as we were going back and forth in the emails, I came to the conclusion that the whole point of this debate is to realize that everything is merely labeled. All phenomena are merely labeled.
Well said, well said. Are you talking about the milk and water debate or just in general?
No, we were talking about aliens and refugees and
see.
And one more, I forget what, immigrants.
Yes. Ultimately, that is the point. Because ultimately, within Buddhism, that is the thing that we need to deeply understand and understand all the implications of it and understand, like any qualms that we might feel about it, like where's the flaw in the qualm, any fears that we might have about what that might imply, are they justified or unjustified? So I agree that ultimately that's the point. But again, this can help us in ways big and small. It can help us in arguments with other people, not to win the argument, but to understand clearly, what are they saying? What am I saying? Do I really mean what I'm saying? Come to think of it, like maybe are they right? So for now, I'll just leave it there. There's so much more that we could say. But how does the debate help us do that? So unlike what we call debate in the West, a lot of it, arguably most of it, comes down to things like rhetoric, comes down to things like stage presence, like the way you deliver something, like if you watch an American presidential debate, later they take a poll to see who do you think won. And you'll see 50-50, 50% of people say, oh, this person won, 50% of it. And nobody on stage reached any kind of conclusion. like, and a lot of the time, to be totally honest, a lot of the time in these debates, like nothing was said, it's all about like the posturing, right? That's not at all what we're referring to when we talk about debate in the Tibetan context. As I know you guys know, what it comes down to here is about how to use pure logic, like actual, not just like general reasoning, but logic, to organize and structure a conversation. What we're doing in a sense is we're kind of taking any claim that we could make, anything that we could say, and we're kind of making ourselves state it in such a framework that there's always like a binary of where this could go next, and that there's a binary, and that binary covers all bases, if that makes sense. That way we can follow a path and we can trace our way back through that path. It's almost like dropping breadcrumbs. We can find our way back. We don't lose sight, like, what is it we're talking about? But wait, how did we define it? But so are you saying this, but earlier you said that, so how do you reconcile those two things? And it's not about scoring points, and it's not about saying, ha ha ha, then you are wrong. It's about saying, oh wait, so maybe that's not what you meant, so you meant this, okay, so now let's, and what it does is it brings us, well, a tremendous sense of clarity and mastery of the material, of whatever material we happen to be debating, whatever material we chose to debate. And so that's why the structure is so crucial to all of it. It's not just a formalism. It's not just like a tradition, This isn't the only way that this could have been done, but this is definitely one way that works. And I'm not aware personally of like any other system that does the same thing, though there could be, or there could have been. So that's why we want to phrase certain things just so. We want to learn certain vocabulary. We want to understand the difference between a statement of quality versus a statement of pervasion, and so on and so on and so forth. So before, the next step I would take is to start talking about then the structure of a debate itself. But before I do that, any questions about this larger point?
I think it's kind of going back to kind of seeing it in application and understanding, and I guess experiencing kind of how it makes a difference. Because obviously logic makes a difference, but I have one friend in particular who I love very much because we're friends, However, whenever we disagree on a point, he'll immediately go along the line of, oh, well, either you're not listening or you don't understand me, because if you did, you'd agree. And to me, that's flawed, because it's like, well, no, not necessarily. It depends whether I think what you're saying is valid. And a lot of this comes back to Buddhism for me, and that obviously people don't like this, that basically if somebody says something to me, I think we spend a lot of our lives just taking in everything everyone says. And it's like, well, they said that and they said that and they said that, so therefore it must be true. And I think this, where this goes is that, well, no, you've actually got to go, okay, well, hang on, is this valuable? Is it beneficial? Is it even truth? Do I want to assimilate this piece of information? Because maybe I don't, no matter how much I love you or care about you. If I don't think that information is truth or for me or valid, then I'm not gonna agree, and people don't like that. And that's, I think, where, interesting to see. Does that make sense?
I mean, I think so. If I'm understanding the implication of what you're saying, I think when I first started learning the system of Tibetan debate a long time ago, I think, as I'm thinking about it now and hearing what you're saying, it occurs to me, I think I thought of it as like a way to prove other people wrong, right? It's like, now I'll show everybody why they're mistaken about stuff. And that doesn't work for the reason you said, that doesn't work for the reason you said. And also that's a waste, frankly, because it's a waste of the opportunity for me to understand something else, right? However, what I find is that when I'm having a conversation with somebody, beyond just like a casual conversation just to pass the time type of thing, like a conversation about like some policy or some understanding of something important and so on, even though I don't use the terminology and the structure in Tibetan debate, it guides my thinking through the conversation. It guides my thinking through the conversation because again, if I want to understand it, this is a framework that will help me understand it. And countless times, I've changed my mind by doing that. And there have been times, I didn't count them, so who knows if they're countless or not. There have been times when the other person either changed their mind or certainly a lot of times attenuated their position, and yeah, so I think it's really powerful. But ultimately, the point of doing this is always for us to increase our understanding. In Buddhism is very clear about the distinction between reasoning for oneself versus reasoning for others. Reasoning for others is to help others have something to think about, but that's secondary to reasoning for oneself. When somebody's debating with us, what they're doing is they're helping us clarify our thinking. They're helping us clarify our understanding of something. It's like a kindness. It's like a favor, and very often, well, sometimes we'll leave that conversation understanding why we think what we think and why we think it's true, as opposed to just believing it because we've always heard it or something like that. Does that touch on what you were getting at?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So how does debate work? So in Tibetan debate, and again, all of this will be explained in later chapters, but just so that we can start thinking about it already. In Tibetan debate, there are two parties involved. What's the word I'm looking for? The default is two persons, two people, but when a debate is happening, people might join either side. So it might end up being more than two people, and it often is. But there's two people. I'll just stick to two people for now, and they each have a different role. One person's role is translated, it's called the defender. They're the defender. And the other person's role, my favorite way that I've seen it translated is the clarifier. However, the way you'll almost always see it is the challenger. So that's just what I'm going to say. I'm going to say the challenger because that's how you'll find it anywhere. It always starts with a C, so that's okay. So there's the defender and there's the challenger. And the debate is something that is being done in a sense, at least to first appearances, for the benefit of the defender, right? So the defender is going to be somebody who believes something, like there's a thesis, there's something that they believe. And the challenger is going to help them clarify their thinking about that. They're going to help them, understand like why they believe it. What are all the implications of what you're saying? Does it contradict with anything else that you also believe? Does it contradict with any evidence that we may have? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the debate will end either with the defender changing their mind and saying, you know what, come to think of it, now I think the opposite of what I thought before. Or with the defender not changing their mind and kind of feeling more certain about what they thought before, or at least no less certain at the very least. Now, the debates can be about anything. You know, the thesis that is being debated could be anything. It could be, you know, something within the Dharma. It could be, you know, is it the case that like an external phenomenon, like a quasar that hasn't even been perceived by human beings out in space, only exists on the basis of mental labeling? Like, how can that be? So that's a debate that could be had right there, right? The debate could be, you know, would increasing taxes on billionaires right now, would that be most helpful to whoever we want to focus on, society, or to people who are in need, or to billionaire? You know, like, we could debate anything. There's no limit. There's no limit. And as we go through it, you know, the arguments that come up, again, there's no limit to what they can be. However, the format, as I keep saying, that's what's going to be, that's what's defined by Tibetan debate. Tibetan debate doesn't define the content, it defines the format. And so the format is always going to be that the challenger is the one kind of, well, there are certain things that there are certain ways that the challenger can make a move. Like, there are certain moves that the challenger can make, and there are certain moves that the defender can make, but they're different. So it's not like it's not like playing chess, where there's one set of rules and both people are following the same, you know, both people have the same options. There are options that the challenger has, there are options that the defender has. And the challenger has a lot more options, which really is as it should be, because, you know, the challenger is trying to help you clarify. So the challenger should have lots of avenues for helping you clarify. As a defender, there's a very limited number of things that you're going to be able to say, you know, but they're enough. They're enough to cover everything that you might want to say. That's the interesting thing. At first, that it might seem like, wait, this has to be too limited, but as you use it, as you play with it, you'll see. So a debate, I'm just trying to think, what do I want to say first? The main tool that a challenger is going to use in a debate is something called a consequence. And for those keeping track at home, the word for consequence in Sanskrit is prasanga. And that's why the prasangaka and prasangika school of Buddhism comes from. So that's a consequence. And in theory, a consequence, it's called a consequence because, let's just say, like, it's a consequence of what the defender is saying, or what the defender is holding, or what the defender is believing. But for practical purposes, the challenger is given more freedom to just fling random consequences at the defender too, right? That's the verb, by the way, fling. That's what you do to consequences in debate. You fling consequences, which I love that. So a challenger really can fling just about any consequence at a defender, and the defender's job is just to give an answer to that. Okay. Now, I'll go ahead and say this. I'm really going to try to keep, like, you know, the number of divisions and subdivisions and things like that to a minimum. But this one division I do think is important. There's two kinds of consequence that a challenger can fling at a defender. They're called a two-part consequence and a three-part consequence. Okay. A two-part consequence is the simpler one. A two-part consequence is basically, I'm just flinging at you some statement, you know? I might say to you, like, it follows that my dog Snoopy is a mammal, you know? That's it. It starts with, it follows that, and there's a reason for that, right? Let's not worry about the reason until much later, sorry. But there's a reason for that. You always say it follows that, right? So it follows that my dog Snoopy is a mammal, boom, right? And so if a challenger flings a two-part consequence, like let's call it a simple consequence, at a defender, the defender only has two options. There's only two things that the defender can do in response to that, right? That's what I mean, it's binary. Either the defender is going to agree and say, I accept, right? Or the defender is going to kind of say, I mean, as of right now, I don't think so, in which case their answer is going to be why. So there's two possible answers. One answer is I accept. The other answer is why. Okay. So if you're not sure why the person said what they said, you're going to say why. If you disagree, if you think the opposite, you know, if the challenger said, it follows that the subject Snoopy is a fish, you know, if they said that to me. And for those who aren't, like, Snoopy is my actual real dog, right? So it follows that the subject Snoopy is a fish. I know that's not true. So the answer I'm going to give is why. You know, like, why, as in like, why on earth are you saying that? You know? Okay. So, so if I, as the defender, if I accept something, then it kind of goes on the record, so to speak, that I've accepted it. I'm allowed to change my mind later. It's fine. But for the time being, you know, that's kind of what I'm accepting. You know, like, so it follows the subject Snoopy is a mammal. I accept. Okay, so we've established that Snoopy is a mammal, right? Until second notice. If instead, if I answer why, if I say why, then the challenger has a couple of options. The challenger could either answer the question as if I had asked it naively, you know, like he could tell me why, you know, oh, Snoopy is a mammal because he's a dog, right? He could tell me why. Or he could just take it that I'm, well, I'll just say it this way, or he could fling at me a consequence, which is the opposite of what I just questioned. So if you said, it follows that the subject Snoopy is a mammal, and I say why, right? Then you might say, it follows that the subject Snoopy is not a mammal, right? You could kind of give me the other binary. All right. Now this is the funny thing, and it took me a long time to understand this. So hopefully, I hope I might be able to save you time by explaining it up front. The funny thing is that if you deny one claim, you have to accept the reverse claim, right? So I'm going to have to either commit that Snoopy is a mammal, or I'm going to have to commit to Snoopy is not a mammal. I can't just not commit to either one. And for a long time, I was like, that's unfair, right? Like, that's just not fair. But here's why that's done. It's because debate, again, this is the piece that I guess I was missing. Debate isn't about winning. Debate isn't about like, I must answer the truth because otherwise I'll lose. That's not the point. Debate is about coming to some certainty, to coming to some conclusion. So if I'm not sure, I want to test the hypotheses, you know? So I want to say, well, I don't know if Snoopy is a mammal or not. So let me see what happens if I say that he is, or let me see what happens if I say that he's not, right? Because then the debate will progress to a point where probably, hopefully, I'll have some clarity and I'll say, oh, okay, then I guess it must be the other thing, that the opposite of what I said. Do you guys follow what I'm saying right now? Right? So for that reason, just for there to be, for the conversation to be able to flow through logic, right? As opposed to just like discourse and like, oh, well, you know, mammals, blah, 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 you know, like, but what is a mammal really? Like suddenly we're changing the subject. For the conversation to be able to progress through strict logic so that I can come to a conclusion about my thesis, right? I need to, at each move, at each point where I'm given a simple consequence, I need to either accept it or explicitly or implicitly accept the reverse of it. Thoughts, questions, concerns up to this point?
So it is always going to be yes or yes, either yes or no. So there is no option for maybe or possibility is there? No, there's no option like that.
That's not going to be in there. That's not going to be in there. Again, there is a way to get at that, right? There is a way to get at that. It's not, it's the system doesn't leave anything that could be the case. It doesn't leave it out, you know, it doesn't overlook anything, but it gets at it in a different way, which will come again. I've decided now will come later.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, Brett.
I might have missed a lot because it's the first time I'm tuning in, but I have read the chapters of the book. What I'm curious about is, could you propose like a definition for a mammal or a definition for Snoopy?
Okay, so that gets into other things that the challenger can do, but I'm going to hold off on that for the moment. I promise you we'll get to it. I don't promise that we'll get to it today necessarily, but I promise you we'll get to it. I mean, unless death comes first, you know, you never know if you're a Buddhist, but sorry, we're doing our death module of discovering Buddhism, so I can't promise that anything will happen necessarily, but okay. So okay. So let me say one more thing about the simple consequence before I tell you about the three-part consequence, because that's the other main component that needs to be understood. The format is important. Okay, so I was explaining it right now casually, but when we do a debate, we're not going to say it casually like that. We're always going to say it follows that. That's going to be part of the structure, right? And we're always going to separate out the subject from the predicate. If we're making a statement of quality, right? That this is why we talked about that. I feel like wax on, wax off, you know, like this is why. So if what I want to say to you is like, hey, do you want to go with Snoopy is a mammal, or do you want to go with Snoopy is not a mammal? If that's what I want to get at, the way I'm going to do it as a challenge is I'm going to say the subject, Snoopy, it follows that it's a mammal. And then you're going to think about it, and either you're going to say, I accept, which means that I accept that Snoopy is a mammal, or you're going to say why. If you say why, now I'm the challenger, I could either tell you why, or I could say the subject, Snoopy, it follows that it's not a mammal. Okay? Why do we do that? Because it's crucial that we keep very clear what is the subject we're talking about. Because in our ordinary conversations, it's almost like a dream, like the subject keeps shifting and we don't realize it. And, you know, and soon we're not arguing about the same thing anymore. So we want to keep the subject clear. Now, the subject is going to shift over the course of a debate, but so that's why we're spelling it out, you know? So somewhere or other, like, I mean, I don't know that anybody would necessarily have a debate about whether Snoopy is a mammal or not, but let's just say, right? At some point or other, I might want to, in the debate later down the line, I might want to say that mammal is a classification of animals, right? So then I might say, okay, then the subject, mammal, it follows that it's a classification of animals, right? I'm making clear what it is I'm talking about. So I'm not saying Snoopy is a classification of animals, right? What my claim isn't about Snoopy at this moment. My claim at this moment is about mammals. The subject mammals, it follows that it's a classification of animals, right? And then I can come back later and say the subject Snoopy, it follows that it's a mammal. Are you guys following along? Jenna?
Only the challenger says consequences, or also the defender says consequences?
Only the challenger. So far, as far as we've gotten, the defender has only two phrases that they can say. They can either say, I accept, or they can say, why. So far, that's it, right? Okay. Now, parenthetically, but sadly importantly, as we've mentioned before, Tibetan debate coming to the West, like we're in like the earliest pioneering stages of that, like at really, really early stages of that. So every document that you find will translate things differently. Okay. So that's nice because it's nice and confusing. So you have to keep thinking, just the point after all, right? But one thing that I wanted to mention is in the text that we're using, I want to use like, you know, since we're using this text, I want to use the verbiage of this text with one exception. The text that we're using, it phrases things as, it follows that the subject, Snoopy, is an animal. But in talking to Venerable Donyo, who I'll be meeting, he said something to me that made me realize it's going to be much easier if we say it there. The subject, Snoopy, it follows that it's a mammal, you know? The logic doesn't matter, you know, we're saying the same thing either way, the logic doesn't matter. But I think in practical terms, it will help us, it will help the debate be clearer if we start, and he says this is the way it's done in the Tibetan too, so it's closer to the Tibetan. So you say the subject blah, it follows that X, Y, and Z is the case about it, right? So the subject Gus, it follows that it is sitting on this chair right now, right? How might you answer that? Just say it.
Accept.
Thank you. All right. The subject Gus, it follows that it's hovering above New York City right now.
Why?
Beautiful, right? That's it, right? Okay, what if I said this? What if I said, oh, let me think of an example. The subject, Gus, it follows that it was born before 1985. What would you say then?
Why?
Perfect, right? Right? I mean, assuming that you don't know, right? Then you can say why. Now, mind you, then I could say to you, if you say why, I could tell you why, or I could say, okay, the subject Gus, it follows that it was not born before 1985. What would you say then?
Accept.
Exactly. Then you have to say, I accept, right? Because again, you're picking a side to test a hypothesis, right? Like basically you're saying, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens if I go with that.
So you also have to say why, though, if you don't know. So I don't know how old you are or when you were born. I'm looking at you thinking, okay, I'm this age. I think you're younger, but I don't know. Yeah, so why is like when you don't agree or if you actually need more information?
Basically.
So
Yeah.
then what would you say? So, I mean, if Janice says why, then you say what?
Well, so again, I as the challenger, I wouldn't have done that because I'm kind of in a corner. I don't know how I'm going to prove that, you know? I wouldn't have necessarily, like for that specific thesis, you know, I mean, but if I want, this would be kind of like a perverse little debate, you know, because it's just unfair. But I could say like, well, it follows that the subject, the subject Gus, it follows that it was born before 1985 because of having been born in 1983, you know? Now we'll see what's what. You see what I mean? Which leads
so you
Would Janet then say I accept, or could she say why again?
So I'm about to answer that. Yeah. Isla, were you saying something?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So this brings us nicely then to the next topic, which is a three-part consequence. Okay. So in a two-part consequence, which at least for today, it just occurred to me, I'm calling it a simple consequence. I'm just making that up, but I like it. A simple consequence, a two-part consequence. I'm just giving you a statement and that's it. Therefore, that's why you only have two options. You only have the option to accept it, or you have the option to test the hypothesis by rejecting it, or deny it by rejecting it by saying why. Okay. Now, if I'm the challenger now, I as the challenger, I need to have a way to convince you of something. I need to have a way to show you something, right? That's where a three-part consequence comes in. A three-part consequence has a statement, but it also has a reason. It gives a reason. So an example again, the subject Gus, it follows that it was born before 1985 because it was born in 1983, right? I give you a reason. It could be a bad reason. The subject Gus, it follows that it was born before 1985 because it was born in the year 2000. That's a terrible reason, and from every angle, but I'm giving you a reason. Okay? So then what do? Well, now you need more than two options. Okay, now you need more than two options. So now there's going to be three things you can say now. First, I'm going to tell you informally what the three things are, and then I'm going to explain to you how we actually say them. And I do have to explain a little bit why, otherwise it won't make any sense at all. But informally, the three options that you can say are, first of all, I accept. You know, if you hear it and you're like, oh yeah, good point. You know, I hadn't thought of that, but that's true. Like if you knew somehow, if you knew, like, that's true, Gus was born in 1983, and I get, therefore, yeah, he was born before 1985. Okay, I accept, right? That's the first option. The second option is you can basically say, hold on a minute, that reason is not true. So if somebody were to say to me, the subject Gus, it follows that it was born before 1985 because of having been born in 1885, right? I would say, whoa, that reason isn't true. Okay, it's just not true that he was born in 1985. And the third thing you could say is basically, I mean, I grant you that the reason you're giving is true, but it doesn't prove what you're saying it proves. Right? So for example, if I said, oh, let's stop talking about my age for a moment. The subject, okay, the subject Snoopy, it follows that it's a mammal because of being a cat. Okay, if I said that, well, then you'd say, well, hold on, that reason isn't true. That reason isn't true. Snoopy is not a cat. On the other hand, if I said to you, the subject Snoopy, it follows that it's a fish because it is an animal. All right. Well, the reason is true. It is true that he's an animal, but that doesn't mean that he's a fish. So that reason doesn't prove what you're saying it proves. Okay? And you can think about it a lot, and you'll come to the conclusion, I assure you, that those are the only three possible things that could be, you know, conceivably. Either the reason you gave me is true and it proves what you say it proves, in which case I accept what you're saying, or the reason you gave me isn't true, and then it doesn't even matter whether it proves or doesn't prove what you're saying, or the reason you gave me, it is true, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't prove what you think it proves. There is nothing else that I could think other than those three things. Therefore, those three answers are enough, right?
Could you give another example of that?
Yes. Suppose I said, the subject, let me think for 1 second. Suppose I said the subject, the United States of America, it follows that it is a democracy because of being ruled by a king. Right? Well, that's not true. It's not ruled by a king. That reason that you gave me is not true. That's what I would say, right? By the way, if I said the subject, the United States of America, it follows that it is a kingdom because of being ruled by a king. The answer is the same. No, that reason still isn't true. The United States of America is not ruled by a king. It's just not true. The reason is not true, right? On the other hand, if I said the subject, the United States of America, it follows that it is a kingdom because of having a president. Now, it is true that the United States of America has a president, but that doesn't prove that it's a kingdom. So you'd basically say, okay, your reason is true, but your reason is pointless. Your reason doesn't prove your claim.
Is that the case in a lot of debate, whereas people just give reasons, and the reasons sound so good and so whatever, but the reason is just completely pointless, and it takes being able to go, okay, well, hang on, yeah, but that doesn't then now mean that.
Exactly. Yes. And from a Western psychology perspective, I'll add that studies have shown that people are more likely to do what you want them to do if you give them a reason, irrespective of what the reason is whatsoever. So they did a study where this was back in the day. So there was like a copy machine, like a Xerox machine in a library, and there was a long line. And they had the person who was doing the study would just kind of go up to somebody in the line and say, hey, would you mind if I went ahead of you? And most of the time we're saying, no, you can't do that, right? But if the person said, hey, do you mind if I go ahead of you because I'm in a hurry? People would be much more likely to say yes, right? But I mean, because I'm in a hurry, like you didn't really kind of add, like, do you mind if I go ahead of you? Like, you know, it didn't really add any convincing argument really, or like, do you mind if I go ahead of you because I just really want to get this done? Like whatever you say, if you just give a reason, people are more like, but not if you're a Tibetan debater. No, sir. Right? If you're a Tibetan debater, you would say, your reason might be true, but it doesn't prove what you're asking, right? Bless you. Okay. So now let me explain the formality here. And this is really important because this, again, with these tools today, like you can do like, I don't know what percentage, but a big percentage of Tibetan debate you can do just based on this. So when you give a 3-part consequence as a challenger, when you say the subject blank, it follows that it is blank because blank, right? That is a prasanga proper. That is like a consequence proper. And a consequence is very closely connected. There's a key difference, but it's very closely connected to the Tibetan syllogism. Okay. Syllogism, I think. A syllogism is the most basic form of logical argument that exists. In a sense, you could say all of logic is based on the syllogism, East and West, right? So in the West, our Western logic is very much based on syllogism. It's based on the Greek syllogism that was developed by Aristotle. In Tibet, the syllogism logic is based on the syllogism, and the syllogism is based on the Indian syllogism that was developed I think it was developed by Dignaga like a very, very long time ago too, probably around the same time as Aristotle. There are some key differences between how the two work, but at the end of the day, you're able to prove the same things using either system, you know? Like, no, it's not that anybody would disagree that the facts of the world are so because we're using different types of syllogism, but you get at them in very different ways. The Western syllogism, the Greek syllogism, it's a lot more efficient for doing math. It was originally developed for doing geometry. The Indian syllogism is a lot more effective and efficient for helping us understand things, for helping us have develop a personal clarity about things. It was originally developed in the context of studying grammar, I think, it's my understanding. So you don't need to know a Western syllogism to study to do Tibetan debate, right? You do need to know an Indian syllogism, but you don't need to know a Western syllogism. But just so that, hopefully for the sake of clarity, since these things come up in the West, the format of the Western syllogism is you have two premises, and then you have a conclusion. Premises. You have two of them. You have the major premise and you have the minor premise. I'm not going to go into all that detail. And then you have a conclusion. So you say, here's a claim that I'm making. Here's another claim that I'm making. From those two, it follows that this conclusion must be the case. The classic example is, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Right? So you start, this is interesting. You start from, I mean, like when I say it that way, it happens very fast, but there's implications to this, that you start from some statement and you don't know where the person is going to go with that yet. You don't know what their point is until they get to their conclusion. You know, all men are mortal, right? And you're like, yeah. Socrates is a man, right? Like, yeah. Okay, then Socrates is mortal. And you're like, oh yeah, right? The Tibetan syllogism, I'm going to say Tibet, even though it's based on the Indian syllogism, I'm just going to say Tibetan because I'm going to stick to that specific format. Tibetan syllogism puts things in a different order. You start with a thesis, right? Which is, it's like, what in the West, we end with a conclusion. In Tibet, you start with a thesis. So if you wanted to show that Socrates is mortal, that's what you'd say first. You'd say the subject Socrates, it is mortal. And then you say why. Then you give your reason. Then you say because it is mortal, because it is human. Right? So in the West, we'd say all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. In Tibet, we'd say the subject Socrates, it is mortal because it is human. All of the components are there in the same way, but they're phrased differently. They're tucked away in different ways. So let me show you guys. So in a Buddhist syllogism, a Buddhist syllogism, I'm going to stop talking about the Western syllogism now. Like I just wanted to, it's an honorable mention, just wanted to acknowledge it. It's gotten us very, very far and done lots and lots of things for us. And again, I would say, if you're going to do math, I would encourage you to rely on the Western syllogism style because it's a lot more efficient for that. Dan Perdue says in a couple of places, he says that he was talking about it with, like, I think a Western logician or something. And when the Western logician understood the Tibetan syllogism, he said, oh, it's like in the West, we're trying to build a train to the top of a mountain. Whereas in Tibet, you're trying to teach people how to climb the mountain for themselves. And I think that's very apt. Like the way logic works in the West, like it's like you plug something in and you get something out. And a lot of times they're going to get things like quantum mechanics, like this quantum theoretical physicists, they know something is true because that it's a logical conclusion from the data, but they have no idea what it means. Right? That's kind of, I think, where we're at in quantum physics today, is my understanding. Whereas using the Tibetan method, every step of the way, you have clarity about what it is that you're saying, where it is that you're at, because the point of it is understanding. So you won't get to quantum physics nearly as fast, I think. I haven't tried. But wherever you get, you'll know exactly where you're coming from, why you're there, what you're saying, what you're not saying. You know, you'll know where you are. It's the other one is like being in the subway. You go in and then you come out somewhere else, right? Whereas this one's like you're walking. Oh, I like that analogy. Okay.
Can I just clarify quickly? So is it Socrates is mortal because all humans are mortal, or is it Socrates is mortal because Socrates is a human and all humans are mortal? Is it just the two bits in the...
It's the last thing you said, except you don't say the last part of the last thing you said out loud. Right?
Okay, it's implied. So you just say Socrates is mortal because all humans are mortal.
Exactly. So the Tibetan syllogism, it leaves certain parts of itself implicit. It doesn't say them out loud. But that works because it's always the same exact thing that it's leaving implicit. It's not like each time it's leaving something else implicit. So who knows if it's right, who knows if it's wrong. It sticks to one format, which is known to be logically reliable, both East and West. Nobody disagrees that this is a logically reliable format. And so it kind of, it doesn't say some of the words out loud, basically, right? So a Tibetan syllogism has three parts, it has three components. The first component is the subject. Right? Subject. The second component is the predicate. And the third component is, don't write this down yet, it's the reason, but here's what you write down. Write down the word sign, is the sign. So there's the subject, there's the predicate, and there's the sign. Okay? The sign is what I've been calling the reason up till now. But the word reason is a little, it's broad, you know, like a reason could be like, what's the reason for this? You could give me a whole paragraph. That's the reason, you know, that's not that, we're talking about something more specific, more precise. We're talking about a sign. So the subject behind that mountain, or behind that hill, subject behind that hill, there is fire because there is smoke, right? So if I say, oh my gosh, there's fire behind that hill, you'd say, how do you know? You say, because there's smoke, billowing black smoke, right? And then let's say, based on that, you'd say, oh yeah, there must be fire then. So how do we know that there's fire there? We know because there's a sign of fire, there's smoke. If I say, the subject Socrates, it is mortal. You say, well, how do you know? How do you know that Socrates is mortal? We'd say, oh, because he's human. And you say, oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, okay, fine, I guess he is mortal, right? So there's the hidden thing, which is Socrates is mortal, that's hidden. And so we need a sign. We need like an evidence of it. And the sign of his mortality is his humanity. His being human is a sign that he is mortal. It's what establishes it for us. The subject, this couch, Snoopy has been on it. How do you know? How can you accuse your dog in such a manner? Right? Because there are paw prints and fur. Right? Paw prints and fur are a sign that Snoopy has been on this couch. Right? That's what establishes it for me. That's how I know. Now, Snoopy, like I wasn't around when he was on the couch. So Snoopy being on the couch, that's not something that I can do, that I can access. It's immediately, like that's hidden for me. But the paw prints and the fur I can see. That's not hidden for me. And that's how I know that he's been on the couch. That's the sign. Linda?
I was wondering if it always, if there, maybe it wouldn't be a debate if it were direct and not inference. But there's another assumption also that you have no other large furry animals around and things
Yes.
like that.
Yes, I just realized that it must be a huge advantage for the Tibetans that they get to teach this to little children who wouldn't think of that. Because not because we're going to overlook that. We won't overlook that. We absolutely won't overlook that. That's why you wouldn't just, if I said to you, the subject is couch, it follows that Snoopy's been on it because there are paw prints and fur, you wouldn't accept that. Like you would say, you would look, are there paw prints and fur? Yeah. And then you say, well, yeah, but that reason doesn't prove what you're saying because of what you said. Maybe it was a different pet. Maybe it was somebody else. See what I mean? Our logic, like when we learn this as adults, like our reasoning has already outpaced our understanding of the formality of it. It's very interesting. So we can already see when there's like a flaw, but we haven't figured out yet how to say it. But anyway, I'm just going off. So let me say this next part, and I think maybe, Linda, that will kind of clarify. So again, so we have the subject, the predicate, and the sign, right? Now, what we're trying to prove what we're trying to prove, what we're trying to establish is that that predicate is true of that subject. That subject is that predicate, right? So if I say the subject behind the hill, there is fire, right? The subject is behind the hill and the predicate is fire. And I'm saying it in the manner of existing. Behind the hill, fire exists, right? So the subject is behind the hill, the predicate is fire. So that's what I'm trying to prove. I'm trying to prove that that subject behind the hill, fire is there, right? And this is what's called the thesis. That's what I'm trying to prove. I'm trying to prove this thesis, that subject and that object and that predicate are connected. Behind the hill, there is fire. The subject on this couch, Snoopy has been on it, right? The subject, Snoopy, he is a mammal. The subject, Gus, he is sitting on this chair. Whatever it is that I'm trying to prove, there's going to be a subject, there's going to be a predicate, and my thesis is that they're connected in the way I'm saying they are. Any questions about that? So, if my thesis were something that you already agree with, then I wouldn't need to give you a sign. I wouldn't need to give you a reason, right? Likewise, if my thesis were something that you could directly see with your eyes or hear with your ears right here and now, I wouldn't need to give you a sign. I wouldn't need to give you a reason. The trick is when the thesis is something that's hidden from you. Like that's the way it's kind of said in Buddhism. It's something that's hidden from you. It's not manifest to you. It's not something that you already know, and it's not something that you can directly experience. Like the subject Gus was born in 1983, or was born before 1985, let's say. The subject Gus was born before 1985. That's not something that you guys already know. And that's not something that you can just look and see without making an inference at the very, very least, right? You can't just immediately directly perceive it. You can perceive the color of my eyes, you can perceive the color of my hair, you can perceive all sorts of things, but you can't perceive my birth date, right? So that's a hidden thesis. So the only way to establish that is by means of a sign, is by means of something that you can't perceive or something that you do know, right? So that's the role of the sign. The role of the sign is to help us see that that subject is connected to that predicate. Another way of saying it is to help us establish that that thesis is true. So how can a sign do that? How can a sign do that? There is one way and only one way that the sign can do that.
The quality.
Exactly. The three modes. It's called the three modes of the sign. The three modes of the sign. So from one perspective, like the way they say it, and the way the Buddhist logic says it, is that there are three things that have to be true, but logically we could abbreviate it to two things, because the last two are kind of equivalent. The last two are two ways of getting at the same thing in most systems of explanation. So so basically what we have to establish is this. We have to establish that the subject connects to the sign, that the sign is true of the subject, right? So if I say the subject Snoopy, it follows that it's a mammal because it's a whale, right? That doesn't work because Snoopy is not a whale. So the subject Snoopy, it follows that it's a mammal because it's a whale. Okay, that doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because Snoopy is not a whale. The subject doesn't connect to the sign. The sign is not true of the subject. Okay, if I say the subject in the space between me and my camera, the subject in the space between me and my camera, there is fire because there is smoke. You guys can tell me, nope, that's not true. There is no smoke between you and your camera because you can see that there's not, right? So that sign is not true of that subject, right? If I say the subject, Socrates, it is mortal because of being human, right? Then as long as you already believe, as long as it's already like in your repertoire that Socrates is human, then you might be able to accept that the sign does connect to the subject. The sign is the property of the subject, is the way it's said. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, then what are the other things that have to be true? The next thing that has to be true is that the sign has to imply the predicate. That's how we're going to connect them, the sign has to be true of the subject, and the sign has to imply the predicate. So the subject, Snoopy, is a mammal because it is a dog, right? Subject Snoopy is a dog, okay, so the sign is the property of the subject. Now, the other thing I need to imply is that if something is a mammal, it necessarily has to be a dog. The sign has to imply the predicate. Really, the sign has to be pervaded by the predicate. The sign has to be pervaded by the predicate. Like if something is that sign, it has to be that predicate. I'll mention the third thing really quickly, but I won't dwell on it too much right now. The third thing really quickly is the reverse pervasion, meaning if something is not the predicate, then it's pervasive that it's not that sign. So if something is not a mammal, then it's not a dog. The forward pervasion is if it's a dog, then it's a mammal. The reverse pervasion is if it's not a mammal, then it is not a dog. In the West, we call that modus tollens. Modus tollens. That will always be the case, though. So you don't have to worry about that. That will always be the case. If the forward pervasion is true, then the reverse pervasion is true. If the reverse pervasion is true, then the forward pervasion is true. We could talk about why there are two of them, but for now, let's keep things practical and simple. So for all intents and purposes, for now, we can say there's only two things that you need to be sure of. One thing is you need to be sure that the sign is the quality of the subject, right? That the sign does connect to the subject in a way that's being claimed. And the other thing you need to be sure of is that the sign implies the predicate, that it's pervaded by the predicate, that if the sign is true of something, then the predicate must be true of that thing as well. So Snoopy is a dog, therefore he's a mammal, right? Behind the hill, there is smoke, therefore there is fire. Gus was born in 1983, therefore he was born before 1985.
Sorry, can you just like say the third one without example?
The third one would be?
The third thing, the reverse pervasion, if something is not what?
Again, just to be clear, I'm saying for now, I think we don't have to worry about it, but I will answer your question nevertheless, right? But just so that you're aware, the reverse pervasion, if something is not the predicate,
Okay.
then it means that it's not the sign.
Thank you.
Janet?
Is it correct to say that we use the two-part consequence if we are directly perceiving, and we use the three-part consequence if we're inferring?
That's a great guess. That's a great guess. That's not quite so. There's lots of reasons we might use a two-part consequence, but I think for now, maybe it might just say like, if we don't think that we need to prove it to the person, let's just kind of think about it that way. Like we would use the three-part consequence when needed. Let's put it that way. Like the standard is to just use the two-part consequences. You know, it follows that the United States is a monarchy. Why? Okay, it follows that the United States is not a monarchy. I accept. It follows that the United States does not have a monarch. I accept. It follows that the United States does not have a king. Why? It follows that the United States does have a king. I accept. Oh, no, it follows that the United States does not have a king because there is nothing that is the king of the United States. Whatever. You see what I mean?
I have a question.
Yes.
In the first condition, it says like sign is true to subject, and second one, it says sign has to be pervaded by the predicate. Can we change that? What is the difference between the true to subject and pervaded by the predicate? Are they same or are they different? Like
they're different. Thank you. And that's the next thing I was going to say. The last time we were talking about the two kinds of statements, right? And that's what we were reading still. The statements of quality and the statements of pervasion. That's why that matters, because what needs to be true is a statement of quality between the subject and the sign, and a statement of pervasion between the sign and the predicate. Okay, so if I say Snoopy is a mammal because of being a dog, there's two claims there. One claim is that Snoopy is a dog, and the second claim is that whatever is a dog is necessarily a mammal. Okay, let me give you an example of, well, let me get to this. The subject Snoopy, it is a species because of being a dog. That's not true. That's not true. Now, Snoopy is a dog. So that first condition is met. But it's not true simply because it is not true that whatever is a dog is necessarily a species. That's not true. It is true that dog is a species. Right? So if we treated these the same, then then that syllogism would have to be considered to be correct, but it's not correct. And this is the reason that is, in other words, it's not that because we're saying this, therefore it's not correct. It's that it isn't correct. It doesn't work. If we're trying to understand why doesn't it work, it's because in reality, logic works this way. Logic works by combining a statement of reason with a statement of pervasion, right? Even in the West, let's think back to our syllogism. Socrates is a man. Whatever is a man is necessarily mortal. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Right? Socrates is a man is a statement of quality. I'm saying something about Socrates. Socrates, the subject, Socrates, it is a man. But when I say whatever is a man is necessarily mortal, that's a statement of pervasion. And that's the only reason that I can come to my conclusion, which is also a statement of quality, which is Socrates is mortal. I'll explain that more, but I don't know if just in case anybody's familiar with Western logic, if this helps clarify, Greek syllogism has a major premise and a minor premise. The major premise is a statement of pervasion. The minor premise is a statement of quality. That's the difference between them. Yes, Linda.
I think that circle with well, first, is it the case that a pervasion is either a subset or a mutually inclusive?
Yes.
Okay, and then that drawing you had last week of the circle for the subcircle,
Next, yes.
as opposed to the dots and the qualities, was really helpful.
I'm glad, because this is exactly what I was about to do next, right? So, let's do this. So, mammal. Sorry, I just want to think about. So, if I say Snoopy is a dog, that's a statement of quality. It's saying that within the circle dog, one of the points is Snoopy. Right? That's all I'm saying there. Now, when I say that whatever is a dog is necessarily a mammal, we're talking about two circles, right? That's a statement of pervasion. It's saying that the circle dog exists inside the circle mammal, right? So Snoopy is a dog is a point inside a circle. Whatever is a dog is necessarily a mammal is a circle inside a circle. And then when I give you the syllogism, the subject Snoopy, it is a dog because it is a mammal, I'm putting these two images together. I'm kind of overlapping them. And I get this. Snoopy is inside dog, and dog is inside, and dog is a circle inside mammal. Therefore, Snoopy is a dot inside the circle mammal. Right? I promise you that this will become second nature and clear as crystal if you practice this. I promise you. okay? We do this all the time, but without realizing what we're doing, and therefore we're constantly making mistakes, okay? Notice what would happen. Here's a different thing, okay? This is different from anything I've shown you yet. So here we're saying, here there's two statements of quality. Here we're saying dog is a mammal, and we're saying Snoopy is a mammal. Both of those things are true, right? If somebody said, give me an example of a mammal, they would say dog. Dog is an example of a mammal. Likewise, if somebody said, give me an example of a mammal, I could say Snoopy. Snoopy is an example of a mammal. Both of those are correct. But this won't prove anything about the relationship between dog and Snoopy. This is just saying that they're both inside the circle mammal, but it doesn't tell me if Snoopy is a dog. It doesn't tell me if dog is a Snoopy. It doesn't say anything about that because they're just points. They can't relate to each other. They're just points. So for them to relate to each other, I have to talk about one of them as a circle, as a predicate. You know, I can relate Snoopy to dog, right? Because Snoopy is an example of the predicate dog. And I can say all dogs are mammals. You know, whatever is a dog, whatever has the predicate dog, necessarily has the predicate mammal. And then I can combine these two. Because I can say, okay, Snoopy is inside the circle, and this circle is inside that circle, therefore Snoopy is inside that circle. That's what this says. Let's do this by brute force a little bit because it will click. It will click. Okay, so by brute force, here's what you need to memorize. You need to memorize that if somebody gives you the syllogism, the subject A, it is B because it is C, then what you need to check is it true that A is C? And is it true that whatever is C is necessarily B? If both of those things are true, then they've just proven to you that A is B. If either of those things is not true, then they haven't proven anything to you. The subject, I don't know why I keep going to politics these days. The subject, Donald Trump, it is the best candidate for the presidency of the United States because it was born in Iowa. Okay, there's two problems with that, at least. One problem is that the subject, Donald Trump, was not born in Iowa. So that's already out, right? Well, furthermore, it doesn't mean that whatever was born in Iowa is necessarily the best candidate for the president of the United States. For example, a chicken born in Iowa, picking an uncontroversial example, I hope nobody knows anymore, but a chicken born in Iowa was born in Iowa, but it is not the best candidate for the president of the United States. I mean, I'm actually not sure anymore. It's better than most. Okay, this again is same tired examples for now. This is just again, wax on, wax off, right? Like the subject Snoopy, it is a mammal because of being a sea lion. Okay, that doesn't fly. That doesn't prove that Snoopy is a mammal. Why? Because Snoopy is not a sea lion. But the one Snoopy doesn't have the property, the predicate of being a sea lion, right? Now let's try another one. The subject Snoopy, it is a mammal because of being alive. Okay, well, that subject is true. I'm sorry, that sign is true of the subject. You know, Snoopy is alive. If you say, give me an example of something that's alive, I could say Snoopy. So that predicate alive is true of the subject Snoopy, but it's not true that whatever is alive is necessarily a mammal, right? The chicken who will be the next president of the United States is alive, but it is not a mammal, right? So there is no pervasion. Okay. So let's just tie this back to debate real quick. So what does this mean? So what this means in terms of debate. Okay. Sorry. One last thing. What I just explained is a syllogism. That's how a syllogism works, right? Now I said a syllogism is very closely connected to a consequence, right? I'm not going to tell you the difference between them right now because for the reasons agreed to in the beginning of the session. But for now, I will tell you, it's going to seem super silly. For now, just know the difference is that consequence has the words, it follows that in it. Okay, that's why I say in debate, you're always going to say it follows that, it follows that, it follows that, because you're going to be dealing in consequences, not in syllogisms, the vast majority of the time. So if I said the subject, Snoopy, it is a mammal because of being an animal, because of being a dog, that's a syllogism. But if I said the subject Snoopy, it follows that it is a mammal because of being a dog, that's a consequence. Okay? We're going to be dealing in consequences. It works the same way in terms of the mechanics of what we just talked about. Okay? So if somebody flings a consequence at us, let's say somebody said to me, the subject Snoopy, it follows that it is a mammal, right? They said that to me. They gave me a simple consequence, a two-part consequence. So I only have two choices. Either I'm going to accept or I'm going to say why. Okay? I'm going to say why. Why? Snoopy is a mammal. Why? All right? So let's say that they choose to respond to that by giving me a three-part consequence. They say the subject Snoopy, it follows that it is a mammal because of being a dog. They fling that at me. The subject Snoopy, it follows that it is a mammal because of being a dog, or because it is a dog. That's just a linguistic thing, right? Okay. So now I have to think. Now I have three options. Now, either I can say, I accept. All of that sounds perfect to me, and you're right that Snoopy is a mammal, therefore. Right? I accept. If I accept, I'm accepting it all. So if I accept, I'm accepting that Snoopy is a dog, and I'm accepting that whatever is a dog is necessarily a mammal, and that therefore Snoopy is a mammal, right? The only two other options I have is I could think, okay, hold on a minute. Wait, Snoopy is not a dog. That would be a mistake in this case. But let's say I thought that, wait, Snoopy is not a dog. Snoopy is a snake, you know? Snoopy, okay. Snoopy is not a dog. So then the answer in debate is the reason is not established. That's what you say. The reason is not established. If the sign is not true of the subject, the words you say are the reason is not established. There's many different translations of it, but that's the one that we're going to use. The reason is not established, meaning I never agreed that Snoopy is a dog. That's not established. That reason is not established. The reason is not established. Let's say that I do agree, though. Let's say that, okay, say again, the subject Snoopy, it follows that it is a mammal because of being a dog. I say that I do agree that Snoopy is a dog, but I don't know that all dogs are mammals, right? Then what I'm going to say is there is no pervasion. Those are the words. There is no pervasion. What that means is there's no pervasion between being a dog and being a mammal. It is not the case that whatever is a dog is necessarily a mammal. Again, that's incorrect in point of fact, but just for the example. And we're allowed to be incorrect, of course. Right? We want to, do everything in good faith. We don't want to just kind of argue things randomly to try to win, but we don't, there's no commitment to being correct. Otherwise, there would be no point, right? The subject outside my door, there is a mammal whining because there's a dog whining. I don't know, did you guys hear him? He just whined outside my door for a little thing. So the subject outside my door, there's a mammal whining because there's a dog whining, right? So I have three options here. I can either accept the whole thing, in which case I'm accepting outside my door, there is a dog whining, yes. And whatever is such that there's a dog whining is necessarily such that there's a mammal whining, right? There's pervasion. In which case, if I agreed with all of that, then I'd say, yeah, okay, so yes, outside my door, there is a mammal whining, yes. So I'd say, I accept, right? Or I'd say, there's no dog whining outside my door. That's not true. That's just not true. In which case, I'd say the reason is not established, right? Meaning the subject outside my door, it's not true that there's a dog whining, right? Or if I thought that was true, but I thought that there are places where there are dogs whining, but there are not mammals whining, then I'd say there's no pervasion, right? There's no pervasion between a dog whining and a mammal whining. It doesn't mean that if there's a dog whining, necessarily there's a mammal whining. Well, again, that's incorrect, but that's what I could say. Okay. Now, one thing that's very helpful to realize, I've found, is that the mammal whining, hold on. What's up, mammal? Gotta come in? Okay, buddy, we're talking about you. Sorry. My husband must have gone out and not told the dog. So one thing that I find it very helpful to realize is that, I talked about there's three components to the syllogism or to the consequence. It's good to be clear on what the components are, So if I say the subject outside my door, there is mammal, like there's a mammal whining because there is a dog whining, right? The components, the actual components are outside my door is one. Mammal whining is another, and dog whining is another. The other words used in the syllogism or in the consequence are not components of it. They're just the structure. They're just for us to have it in language, right? So there is not part of the syllogism really, right? Because of being, that's not part of the syllogism. So we can, to some extent, we can be flexible with how we phrase that. We don't have to, because really the syllogism is, like the syllogism really boils down to outside my door, mammal whining, dog whining. That's enough for you to tell me if I'm right or wrong. You follow? The truth is, it's just to be totally honest, there's one more component that you need, which is I need to tell you whether I'm saying being or existing. That's the only last component, it's the mode of the syllogism. Is it a being mode or an existing mode? That's all. Because if I say outside my door, mammal whining, dog whining, if I'm saying that in existing mode, that works. Meaning, if it's true that outside my door, there exists a mammal whining, then it follows that there exists a dog whining, yes. But if I were saying that in being mode, that would be just nonsense. I would be saying outside my door is, like the outside my door, the world outside my door is a dog whining, and that's just not true. You don't have to worry too much about that right now, right? But as long as those components are all there, you have your syllogism, you have your consequence. And with those components, you have all the most fundamental tools that you need to be able to have a Tibetan debate. Whatever somebody flings at you, you have a way of answering, right? So there are, again, there's a little bit more to Tibetan debate. We'll add some more pieces, some other things that can be done, you know, so that there's even more, so that we can reach all corners of conceivability. But for now, if you're the defender, you're limited to only a very precisely defined number of things that you can say in a debate. If somebody just somebody just flung a consequence at you, a simple consequence, a two-part consequence, then all you have to decide is, am I going to say I accept, or am I going to say why? That's it. You have no other option. If somebody just flung a three-part consequence at you, then you have to decide, am I going to say I accept? Am I going to say the reason is not established? Or am I going to say there is no pervasion? That's it. There's no fourth thing you could say. Okay, let's try this real quick. Let me ask, if possible, let me ask everybody to turn on their mic, just so that I can kind of call on you guys quickly. Just put you on the spot. All right. Hey, Isla. It follows that the subject, a blue whale, is a fish.
Oh, I can't remember my biology. I can't remember if a whale's a mammal or a fish.
That's
Is it a mammal? I'm
fine.
sorry, I got COVID on Monday. Okay, first of all, it's not a three-part, it's a two-part consequence, because there's not a reason. You just said it is.
Exactly.
So if we're going with it's a mammal, then I'd say why.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That's it. And again, it doesn't. Don't apologize. I'm sorry if I put you on the spot. You don't have to apologize. That's not the point. You know, like, we're not marine biologists, right? That's not the point. The point is that either you could say I accept, or you could say why. As long as you have said one of those two things, you did your job, right? My job would be to help you figure it out if we're going to continue the debate from there. All right. But I'm going to say, hey, Sheila, it follows that the subject, a whale, is a fish because of being a tuna.
I would say why.
Good instinct, but notice that's a three-part consequence that I just flung at you, right? I just said, subject, a whale, it follows that it is a fish because of being a tuna. So you have three things you could say. Either you could say, I accept, or you could say the reason is not established, or you could say there is no pervasion.
I think there's no pervasion.
Good guess. Try one more time.
The reason is not established.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yes. I'll tell you, it takes a few hours, to be honest, like a few hours before it clicks which one is which. Okay. But sometimes a few hours can be spread over many weeks, depending on how much we're practicing, right? So the reason is not established, meaning, what does that mean? So if I said the subject, a whale, it is a fish because of being tuna, right? The reason is established, meaning a whale is not a tuna, right? That's what we're saying. A whale is not a tuna. Okay. All right, Brett. It follows that the subject, a whale. Well, I'm sorry. The subject, a whale, it follows that it is a fish because of being an animal.
There is no pervasion.
Right. Okay, a whale is an animal, so the reason is established. but it's not true that whatever is an animal is necessarily a fish. So there's no provision. Very nice. Very nice. Linda, it follows that the subject, Shamu, you guys know Shamu? Yeah, follows the subject Shamu. The subject Shamu, it follows that it is a mammal because of being a whale.
I accept.
Right. So what Linda's accepting is that Shamu is a whale, and that whatever is a whale is necessarily a mammal. Right? Okay, let's think of something else. All right. Clara, it follows that the subject, my phone, the subject, my phone, it follows that it is electronic because of being a piece of technology.
Could you repeat it again?
Absolutely. The subject, my phone, and I'll even show you, right? It follows that it is electronic because it is a piece of technology.
I accept.
All right. Anybody have a different thought?
Yeah.
There's no provision.
You want to say why?
I don't know how informal debate, but I feel like there's a lot of technology that's not necessarily electronic.
Can you give an example?
Circles, a plow.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
A plow.
Plow, okay. Yeah, so a plow is a piece of technology. It's not electronic. So there's no pervasion. It's not the case that whatever is a piece of technology is necessarily electronic, right? This is the point. We're having fun, as my friend says. All right. Dinesh, it follows that the subject, my phone, is not electronic because of being a plow.
Why?
Good guess. Good guess. Let's think about it. I gave you a because, right? I gave you a three-part reason, right? So your options are to say, right? So your options are to say, I accept, the reason is not established, or there's no pervasion. Okay, so once again, the subject, my phone, it follows that that it is not electronic because it is a plow.
Reason not true. Reason not established.
The reason is not established. Exactly. It's not established that my phone is a plow. Right?
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Just anything real quick. Okay. Andrew. Okay. Andrew. The subject, my mother, and this, be careful, right? The subject, my mother, it follows that it is a biped.
A what?
A biped.
I don't understand that word.
B-I-P-E-D. So it's I would.
Well, you'd need to say why then.
That's right.
Okay. Why?
Okay, good, right? So let's keep going with this so you guys see where this could go, right? Let me just be a little difficult just for the sake of the fun. The subject, my mother, it follows that it is a biped because of being human. Now you still don't know what biped means. So what can you say?
Why?
So I can't accept.
Uh-huh.
Oh, hang on a second. So the reason is a sign not true of the subject. The sign is human. So the sign is true of the subject.
Uh-huh.
That's not that one. There may or may not be pervasion. I
Uh-huh.
don't know. So therefore I have to accept.
Well, so if you don't really know that the sign is established, that the reason is established, and you don't really know that there is pervasion, then you don't want to accept. That would be very diplomatic, but we're not being diplomatic, right? We're kind of testing things out. So don't accept. You know that the sign is true, or at least you're giving me the benefit of the doubt that my mother is human, right? So then the only option left is to say, well, I don't know what biped means, so maybe for all I know, it is not the case that whatever is human is necessarily a biped. So then you'd say,
there is no pervasion.
bingo, that's what you'd say, right? And now it's my job, if I want, to prove to you that whatever is human is necessarily a biped, right? So biped means walks on two legs. Okay, so Jana, it follows that whatever walks on two legs, it follows that whatever is a biped necessarily walks on two legs.
And I accept, but the reason is established. No, what do I say? I accept.
So this is a simple consequence, right? I'm not giving you a reason. So your options are I accept or why. So I'm saying it follows that whatever is a biped necessarily walks on two legs.
I accept.
All right. It follows that whatever is human is necessarily a biped.
I accept.
It follows that the subject, a man with only one leg, is human.
I accept.
All right. It follows that the subject, a man with only one leg, is a biped because of being human.
I accept.
It follows that the subject. Okay, so notice what you're accepting, right? Just for everybody's sake. So I said the subject, a man with only one leg, is a biped because of being human, right? So by accepting that, Jana is accepting that a man with only one leg is human. Jana is once again accepting that whatever is human necessarily is a biped. And Jana is accepting my thesis that a man with only one leg is a biped. Okay, so now I'm going to say, Jana, the subject, a man with only one leg, it follows that it walks on two legs because of being a biped. You asserted the reason.
No, the reason is not established.
Okay, so by saying the reason is not established, what you're saying is that a man with only one leg is not a biped.
No, it's a biped. There's no pervasion.
Okay, so now if you say there's no pervasion, what you're saying is that if something is a biped, it doesn't mean that it walks on two legs.
Correct, yes. There's no.
You guys see where we're going, right? That was awesome, Jana, by the way. Just that was great. That was great. But you see where we're going to get with this stuff, right? There's all sorts of fun little pieces that we add, like anytime somebody takes back something they said before, we say "sa," you know, and we give like little warnings, like in chess, you say mate or checkmate, you know. So we give little warnings, like I can fling a consequence at you, and I can say you have accepted the reason. You know, or I can say you have accepted the pervasion, or I can say you have accepted the reason and the pervasion, you know, or I could say the three spheres, which means you have accepted the reason, you have accepted the pervasion, and you have denied the thesis earlier. So now you're going to have to contradict yourself. That means basically it's like checkmate. It's like you're going to have to contradict yourself. You see what I'm saying? Okay, I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit in the end there, but I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a flavor of what this looks like, okay? So we're out of time. We're actually a little over time, but I wanted to give you guys that little bit of a framework to where we're going and what we're doing. What I want to ask everybody to do for next time is to read, where did my note go? It's chapter 6, I'm almost certain. I had it written down here and I don't see. Oh, here it is. Yeah, read chapter 6, the Buddhist syllogism. Oh, can we meet Snoopy? Oh, my husband just got home and he took him. Sorry. But maybe next time. So the Buddhist syllogism, and while you're going, because Dan Perdue isn't going to get into, again, the debate part until a later chapter, which we'll move to. So he's not going to use those terms. The reason is not established. There's no provision. I accept. So you keep it in mind as you're reading it, right? You keep it in mind. Think about if somebody gave a syllogism to you, like whatever syllogism he's giving you, think about whether you'd say, I accept, whether you'd say the reason is not established, whether you say there's no provision. Okay? And keep in mind too, and I think he's going to say this, but keep in mind too, that what the components of the syllogism really are. The verbiage around it doesn't matter very much, right? The verbiage around it is just to set, the context. What you need to know is, are we talking about being or existing? That's one. And then you just need to know what's the subject, what's the predicate, what's the sign. That's all that really makes up a syllogism. Everything else is just grammar. Okay? All right. So let's just end in the Buddhist way with a dedication. And we just think about the effort that we made in the time we've been together, the choices that we made, the decisions that we made, everything we did in the time we've been together. From a Buddhist point of view, all of it is going to have an impact on our minds. Nothing is going to get wasted. So we think, may it impact our minds only in ways that increase our clarity, increase our wisdom, increase our motivation to be of benefit to all sentient beings, so that we can accomplish our goal of being of the best possible benefit to all sentient beings as much as possible. All right, guys. Thank you so much. And
yes, thank you, everybody. So everybody, there's no class next week. But and I won't be here, but if you all want to meet at this time, Gus is something else. He has another commitment. You guys can all meet and practice or do whatever you want to do. But I just want to know there's no official class next week. Be the same link if you want to, get together. I'll send you all each other's email addresses. So Linda, if you want to set up some sort of a practice group, and also remind you about next week.
That's a great idea. Thanks for reminding me. I have another commitment next week. Okay. It is true. So yeah, I hope you guys do that. I hope you have fun. All right, but I have to run. So take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.